Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne-pestana, and we're here today with special guest, Parvati Markus, who's here to share her new book, Whisper in the Heart. So welcome to the show, Parvati.
Thank you. It's delightful to be here.
What an honor it is to have you here and to talk about your new book. What inspired you to write this one?
Well, it's really, in a lot of ways, a follow-up to my first book, which is Love Everyone. In Love Everyone, I interviewed about 75 of the Westerners who had gone to India back in the early 1970s and met Neem Karoli Baba. And this is, that book is their story. But then Neem Karoli Baba left his body in September of 1973. And since then, I started getting stories from people telling me, well, I've had a dream about him that felt very real, or I saw him in my meditation, or I felt him walking next to me. And so I started to collect stories of Maharaji, of people meeting him after he had left his body. And so Whisper in the Heart is a collection of over 150 stories from different people of how they have met Maharaji since he left his body.
I would love for you to share what a guru is, because I think a lot of times people get this a little misconstrued.
Yes, a lot of times, because they think it's like, my golf guru or my, in India, there are two different ways of looking at the word guru. First of all, guru itself is a Sanskrit word, and it literally means coming out of darkness. It's the being who can take you out of the darkness and into the light. So guru literally means the remover of darkness. Then you have something that's called an upaguru, which is somebody who's your teacher. That can be your golf guru. It can be your yoga teacher. It can be your, anybody who furthers you a step along the path. And then there's the Sat guru. Sat means truth. And so that is the guru who can remove the darkness of your ignorance and lead you into the truth of your being. And that is a very rare being. And that's what we found when we met Neem Karoli Baba.
So how did your path lead to Maharaji? Where did that start?
Well, it started for me with meeting Ramdas in 1969. For those of your listeners who may not know who Ramdas was, he and Timothy Leary, back when he was Richard Alpert, he and Timothy Leary had been psychology, professors at Harvard, and were both thrown out because of the experiments that they were doing, which were actual scientific experiments at that time with LSD. We're talking, in the early 1960s there. And I wound up meeting Ramdas in 1969, in the summer of 1969. I had been hanging out with a group of my first hippies that I ever met and had taken my first trip. And in that trip, I had experienced this space of oneness. And when I came down from that, somebody handed me the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And as I read it, it was like, wow, these people knew about these states long before we ever heard about them. This is sort of what had happened to me. So I got very interested. And 3 weeks later, I was at a party and I met a guy who said, hey, want to go meet a saint? And I said, hey, 3 weeks before I would have said, forget it, they don't exist. I was open to seeing what this was about. So I said, sure. And we went and drove up to Ramdas's father's farm. And Ramdas was outside wearing his white robe and, doing his mala, bare feet, beard. And I looked at him and all I could see was light. And there was just light streaming from him. And I was straight. I mean, I hadn't smoked anything. I hadn't dropped anything. And I moved in the next day. And a couple of days after that became Ramdas's secretary. And after that, I helped him. The first book I ever worked on, as a matter of fact, was Be Here Now. He used to send me his handwritten copies for the his story part of the book. And I would type them up and gently edit it and send it back to him. So I've always said my first book I ever worked on was Be Here Now. And because of meeting Ramdas, those of us who spent that summer in New Hampshire with him in 1969 all wanted to go to India to meet the being that had done this for Ramdas, that had made him just glow with light. Whatever he had gotten, we wanted to get it from where he had gotten it. And so 2 years later, I was in India.
That's just absolutely remarkable. And working with Ramdas during that time, that must have been just such an experience.
Oh, it was so wonderful. It was during the time when we really felt love was going to conquer all. Everything was going to be all right. The world was going to turn better because there was this consciousness coming in, and love was the basis of it all. And we were so excited, and we were so young and hopeful.
It sounds like an extraordinary time, just to be there. And so when you went to India, I mean, what was it like? I mean, you hadn't really been in this movement that long, had you?
Well, a couple of years at that point. And during those couple of years was a time when a lot of the quote gurus from India were coming over to the West, like Swami Muktananda. And, there was sort of a constant flow that was happening at that time. And I was living in New York. And so I would meet and spend time with these beings who came over. And it was interesting because I always thought there was something wrong with me. I mean, I spent time with Swami Muktananda. When I first went to India, I spent time with Satya Sai Baba. And I kept thinking, well, my heart must be really closed. I just don't feel like I can bow to them or touch their feet or, feel any sort of connection with them. And then as soon as I met Maharaji, it all happened of itself. There was nothing wrong with my heart. I just hadn't found my connection.
Do you think a lot of people go through that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. They think something's wrong with them when in fact they just haven't found where their piece of the puzzle fits.
I love that. I love that. Because isn't that the truth? We have to come in alignment with certain people that are on our path to go to certain places.
Right. I mean, I think you'll find, like in the stories in Whisper in the Heart, and just in talking to anybody who has had that experience, where suddenly you feel like I'm home. I'm in that place where I feel totally safe. I feel loved. I feel secure. And the feeling of I'm home for the first time in my life. I feel like I'm home. And I experienced that in the foothills of the Himalayas in India.
Oh, what a remarkable journey that must have been. When did you first meet Maharaji?
I first met him in September of 1971. I had come to India, I believe it was in March, and I had gone to South India first because that's where my flight landed me, was in Bombay. Because I had been spending time with this teacher in New York named Hilda Charlton, who liked Satya Sai Baba. I went to see him first because it was a time of year when Maharaji was traveling and I didn't know where to find him. So that's what I did. I spent 3.5 months in South India and then finally made it up north, where I spent 6 weeks in a hotel with hepatitis. And after that, Maharaji was in town and the rest of my time in India was spent with him.
Well, it is a journey. Here you are, a woman traveling out of country. I mean, was any of that scary for you?
Well, I wound up, even though I had planned to just get on a plane by myself, it turned out that 2 other people I knew from a meditation group in New York were going on the same flight. So we wound up traveling together. And I don't think I ever actually traveled by myself in India. There was this sort of flow of Westerners that were there. And there was always somebody to travel with. And then once I got to Maharaji, I was just so totally taken care of. I mean, his Indian devotees took us in as if we were a family. And it was an extraordinary experience to be suddenly part of this family and community of very pure devotional beings. It was wonderful.
What did it feel like being in Maharaji's presence?
Uh-huh. That's a hard one. I mean, so few of us have ever had the experience of being in the presence of unconditional love. I mean, no matter how much our parents may have loved us, or our partners may have loved us, or our kids love us, whatever, there's always some sort of conditionality around that. And with Maharaji, he was just pure love. And even though you knew, and he let you know that he knew everything about you, and I mean everything about you, and he still absolutely loved you. So as Dr. Larry Brilliant, who you may have heard of, he's an epidemiologist that's been around a lot during these COVID years. He was also with Maharaji. And the way he put it was that when, I'm in front of Maharaji and I feel his love for him, I mean, he's supposed to do that. He's a saint. That's his job. Okay. The real miracle is that when I'm sitting in front of Maharaji, I love everyone. So you're really sitting in a space of love. And that's very hard to describe.
I can understand that. We have interviewed Dr. Larry Brilliant before in his book, Sometimes Brilliant, which is phenomenal.
Brilliant book. Yes.
Yes. And to hear his journey is just as it is with yours. It's just so fascinating to get to the places that you have gone to. I mean, many people go their whole lifetime and don't feel that deep connection of unconditional love at all.
Oh, I know. It's truly, pure grace is the only way I think about it, and that, and just really good karmic connections.
Good job.
Yeah. And, it wasn't all bliss. People think, I say, well, it was sitting in a space of love, but it wasn't just blissful. I mean, I spent a lot of time crying down by the river, because when the light is that bright, any sort of darkness within you sort of looms really large. You're constantly feeling this need to get pure, to be able to empty out more of your stuff so you can hold more of that light, so you can let more of that light throughout you.
You talk about also, initially you felt like you had a small cup.
Right.
And I was really touched by that, because I think a lot of people can relate to that.
It was just an extraordinary experience. I wish I could explain it in a way that people can relate to. I mean, one of the ways that, I knew that Whisper in the Heart had to be written was because I actually first met Maharaji before I got to India. What had happened was that after that summer I spent with Ramdas, and I went back to live in New York and started working for an advertising agency so I could make some money so I could go to India. Ramdas had given me this little black and white photo of Maharaji and, these New Hampshire wooden malas. So I had my mala and I had my little picture of Maharaji. And I sat in front of that picture saying a mantra, basically, which was, I'm scared and you've got to help me. It was a time of year when Ramdas was off at Lama. Lama had no phones. I couldn't get in touch with anyone. I hadn't yet met the woman who would be my meditation teacher. So I was really sitting alone with this fear. And so I reached out to Maharaji. I don't know how long I sat in front of that picture saying, I'm scared and you've got to help me. But pretty soon the picture dissolved in like this blue light, and I could see Maharaji moving behind it. And it just lasted for a few seconds, but it was enough for me to lie down, and then everything was okay. Needless to say, I got a larger picture of Maharaji after that. And I basically lived my life in front of that photo, and I would have conversations with it. I mean, I didn't tell people I was talking to a picture. Back then, it was not something you said out loud. But when I finally got to India, one of the first things Maharaji said to me was, you used to talk to my picture all the time, he said. You asked many questions. So I knew, in fact, that he had been there, that I had connected to him through that photograph. And that's how I knew that all these people's stories of meeting him after he left his body were absolutely real. It was because I had met him that way.
What a remarkable encounter you had. And it just helped you at that time, but also to get that confirmation It must have given you a lot of just peace in your heart.
Oh, absolutely. But that's what I meant about he literally knew everything about you. He knew that I had been talking to him in his picture. I remember one day when a friend of mine had her toast had burnt that morning for breakfast, right? And she hadn't offered it to Maharaji, which she was used to doing, was offering all her food to him before she ate. And when she got there that day, Maharaji looked at her and said, "You didn't offer me your toast this morning." Now, that's what he picked up on, or that's what he said out loud, whereas she had also had a real fight with her husband that day. And he didn't mention that, but you knew he knew it. I mean, if he knew about the toast, he certainly knew about the fight. So that's what I mean about knowing. And he always did it in sort of a kind way that you understood what he was talking about, but no one else necessarily did.
So what was life like in India?
I was in India for a year. That was all my visa allowed. I mean, a lot of people who stayed longer than that either threw away their visas or managed to get some other form of extension that I didn't know about.
Here you are with Maharaji, you're in India. What was life like on a daily basis for you?
Well, on the days that we were with him, I mean, periodically he would send us away for a week or whatever, and we would go do something else, like take a meditation course with Goenka, or go sit on a houseboat in Benares or things like that. So there was a lot of sort of side trips that way. But on the days that we were with Maharaji, we were staying mostly in a hotel that was run by his devotees in Nainital, which was about a half-hour bus ride away from the temple where Maharaji was. Now we would get to the temple, and if he was out sitting outside on the tucket on his little platform, we would just go and sit with him, and he would talk and throw fruit. He never taught. I mean, he never lectured. He didn't do anything like that. It was purely the path of bhakti yoga, of devotional yoga. It was not a mind thing. He said, people asked about meditation. He said, if you want to do it, go ahead. But there were no rules. There were no things we had to do. We hung out, and sitting in front of him, you just couldn't take your eyes away. It was sort of like so compelling. It was such a powerful experience just sitting there and going through whatever you were going through in your mind, but feeling that you were sitting in this soup of love. And, we would be served lunch. We would be sent to someplace in the back of the temple to rest for a couple of hours after we ate. Then we would be called back down again to be with Maharaji again. And then when the last bus to Nainital would come, he would say, "Jao, last bus." We'd get on the bus and go back to the hotel.
What a great experience that must have been. You often hear about people being in his presence, feeling that way as well.
Absolutely. I mean, we basically, when we weren't with him, we were basically sharing stories of what we were going through with him. It was, or we would listen to the Indian devotees who had spent, 40 years with him at that point, and hear all their stories over and over again. A couple of the books I edited early on were Dada Mukherjee's books, By His Grace and The Near and the Dear. And Dada Mukherjee was a professor of economics at Allahabad University who had spent 40 years with Maharaji, as a very, very close person. And he had so many stories, and we would just love to listen to them when he was around. And the same with other of the old devotees. And that's what we did. We just lived in this soup of telling stories, hearing stories, doing little pujas, little ceremonies, learning how to sing this arti, the song of praise to the guru. And that's what we did.
What was it like coming back after being in that type of
Oh,
environment?
oh, that was so hard. Coming back to the West was so difficult. I remember I actually left at the same time as Ramdas. The whole time I was there was during the time of Ramdas's second trip to India. And there were 8 of us that left together. And one of the places the plane stopped in London. And I remember we had a day or two in London before our flight to the US. And I remember, we had all been in India for at least a year. And we're standing on a street corner in London, and this is 1972 now. And the women are walking around wearing hot pants, like these satin neon green hot pants. And we hadn't seen above a woman's ankle in a year. And it was just like horrifying. Oh my God, what are they wearing? And then going into a grocery store and going, oh my God, cheese, we can eat cheese. But coming back to the States was really difficult. And in the beginning, we sort of clung in a group, to like preserve what we had before we realized that there was nothing that was going to chip away at that basic connection that we had to Maharaji. That distance really wasn't going to make a difference.
That must have been very comforting to know that you could still have that soul connection.
Well,
in the
beginning, of course, I came back in 1972. We always thought, well, we'd come back to the States, we'd get healthy again, we'd, make some more money and be able to go back to India and stay for a longer time with Maharaji. And then, of course, a year later, he left his body. And that was a total shock. We really felt like he was eternal. And that was a very difficult period of time after he left his body, because that was such an unexpected loss of that connection that we had made externally. And now we really had to dig to make that connection just internal.
Oh, wow. That must have been just really difficult, being able to make that connection and then also go through that grief.
All right. Krishnadas talks about it a lot. About how he went through 10 years of total depression following Maharaji's death. For him, it was especially centered around the fact that Maharaji had asked him to come back, and he was busy with his, first girlfriend since he had returned, and he didn't come back right away. And then Maharaji left. And so he was plagued by guilt. We all went through different ways of grieving, different ways of trying to find a way to get back into that space that we had experienced with him. So that's when all the things that we hadn't done in India, like, the strict, the adherence to a meditation practice, or to a chanting practice, or to doing the things that we needed to do to cleanse the mirror of the heart and allow more of his light in.
After Maharaji's passing, when he left his body, was there a sense to more kind of rally around Ramdas to really kind of understand a greater sense of the teachings?
Oh, well, you've got to understand, Ramdas was going through it as well. Ramdas had become less our teacher, which he had been when we first met him, to being a guru by, somebody, that we were connected to as, brothers and sisters of the same spiritual family. And it was a while before Ramdas really stepped into becoming who he was, and especially after he had the stroke, which is sort of what turned him so inward. He had no choice at that point. that he really became that loving awareness that he was in the last number of years of his life. But yes, we did gather around him. Yes, we did, do a lot in different projects with him at different times, different people. I mean, he had so many interests from, the Social Venture Network to founding Seva to, working with all the various Buddhist teachers that were setting up different centers. It's been a long journey of sort of bringing the Eastern consciousness into the West.
Was it Maharaji that actually told Dr. Larry Brilliant to go and work on a cure?
Well, not a cure for smallpox. It was part of the whole WHO, the World Health Organization campaign to eradicate smallpox. And India was the last holdout. And Maharaji sent Dr. Larry 17 different times to get his job there. Dr. Larry kept saying, "They don't want me there, Maharaji." Maharaji would say, "Turn around and go back." Keep going back. 17 times it took before he actually got his job with WHO.
And I bet they were very grateful for that afterwards.
I'm sure.
Such a turning point there. With that. My goodness, you have so many stories in this book. What is one that you'd like to share with us?
Well, of course, there are some really spectacular stories, where Maharaji really shows up, like this woman in France who was had been very suicidal. Her life seemed to be crashing down around her. She took a bunch of pills, went to bed fully dressed, and then surprisingly woke up. And when she did, she saw that her front door was a little bit open, and she remembered having closed it, and so she went to the door to see what was going on, and she found this, quote, tramp lying at her doorstep covered with a blanket. And she didn't know how he had gotten past security or anything. And he looked at her and he said, "Go sing," sort of in a rough voice. And she shut the door and she went to her computer and went to YouTube, where she usually listened to classical music. And instead of classical music, what popped up on her screen was Krishna Das. I mean, she didn't know who he was. And behind Krishna Das was this big picture of Maharajji. And she looked at it and she says, "Oh my God, that's the tramp at my front door." And she went to get an orange to go give it to the tramp, and he was gone. But because she had seen the picture and seen Krishna Das, she got involved in the whole thing, and it totally changed her life, turned it around completely. Now, that's one of the more spectacular ones. I happen to like a lot of the sort of small stories. Let me see if I can find one
I know there's so many great ones in your book
to share with you. Just the way I had cried for help to Maharaji's picture when I was going through that trip and I had seen him. I mean, I have a section of the book that's basically a cry for help. And I'll read this story. It's a little over a page long. And Val Cheney is Pete Holmes' wife. Pete Holmes wrote the foreword to the book, which is just absolutely delightful. His sense of humor is just marvelous. And his spiritual understanding is quite amazing. Anyway, this is Val's story. She goes, "I came to the retreat in Maui because I love Ramdas. I understood that what Ramdas was transmitting was Maharaji, but he wasn't in the forefront for me. I saw him as maybe the same thing as Christ, which was the narrative I grew up with. I was able to access it through Jesus. I had the same kind of upbringing Pete Holmes, my husband, did. Very fundamental Christian. We had pictures of Maharaji in our house because of Pete. I would look at the pictures, but I wasn't really interested in engaging in a relationship with him. I didn't know how I felt about it all. When I saw that big picture of Maharaji at the retreat, I got it. But I wondered, am I just trading Jesus for Maharaji? I called him Maharaj Jesus. When we came to the retreat, our daughter was 8 months old. When she was 4 months old, she had had a bad UTI with a high fever, and we had to go to the emergency room. She had to get a catheter put in multiple times, and I worried that it was traumatic for her. It was traumatic for us, too, the hardest thing I've ever gone through. When we came to the retreat in May, she was acting exactly how she had when she had the UTI, with the exact same symptoms. I fell apart. I knew the way you know when you're a mother what was happening. I was rocking her, and she was doing this heavy breathing that she had only ever done from the pain of the UTI. Pete was out swimming in the ocean, so I was alone with her, trying to get her to sleep. Her body was so tense. She was doing that breathing, and I couldn't get her to relax. I was crying. It suddenly occurred to me to ask Maharaji to intervene. I was very specific. I remember saying, all right, Maharaji, this isn't a test. You don't have to prove yourself. That's not what this is. But here I am. I'm here at this retreat, and you're on my mind. And so if you could help us out with this, that would be great. But it's not a test. That's a big Christian thing. Don't test God. But it's also that I didn't want it to be like, this is your chance to prove yourself, and then I'll be in your camp. As soon as I said those words to Maharaji, instantly her whole body relaxed, and she gave this deep exhale. And I knew, just like I had known that it was a UTI, I knew in that moment it was gone. And it was. There was no sign of it after that. I came out of the room and saw Pete in the ocean, and we had a beautiful swim. I was crying, and I told Pete what had happened. It felt like we were swimming in love.
Oh my goodness, what a remarkable story.
Yeah.
That is just amazing. To hear that and that deep connection.
I know. It's just these are the things I just love.
Well, and I know a book can only hold so many stories,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm sure there's probably 3 or 4 books that could be in the mix from all the stories that you've heard at the very least.
Oh, at least. I mean, unfortunately, we had to cut out probably a third of the stories I had simply because, there was only a certain amount of word count that the publisher wanted. But I think what we're doing now is we're going to be setting up a Whisper in the Heart Facebook group. So it's not done yet, but it's going to be happening where people can come and post their stories of Maharaji.
Oh, I love that. What a great place for people to come together in community.
And community and sharing their stories. And this is so much of what we did in India. Like I said, all we did was told our stories and listened to stories because stories are what convey the heart of a situation. Stories are what bring you into something you can relate to. You can relate to somebody else's life, and to what they've experienced. And you can feel it through their experience. And that's the joy of storytelling.
Passing that information along, especially something as enlightening and empowering as these stories,
Right.
Now, do you have a story that includes both Maharaji and Ramdas?
Oh, yeah. There's a whole section on just Ramdas in the book. And of course, the retreats. A lot of the stories about the retreats, especially the ones that happened in Maui, which are still going on, by the way, again. They sell out within like 4 minutes of being posted. So
it's good to know that that's still continuing.
Absolutely. I'm going to read just part of Mike Kroll's story, okay? Mike Kroll is a person that helps organize all the retreats. And he used to work for Bose Corporation. So he somehow got, everybody assumed he knew how to deal with wires and sound. So let me just read this last part of his story. Maharaji's finishing touch for me was a public Robert Swoboda event I organized for the Center of Spiritual Studies. I could tell that there really wasn't a lot of synergy between Ramdas and Robert. Every volunteer that I had lined up fell away for that night. The guy that was supposed to do sound that night bailed. And it was assumed that because I had worked at Bose, I knew everything there was to know about audio. At Bose, I had been in their consumer home entertainment division, not the pro division. I knew what a mixer was, and I could figure out how to work the XLR cables, but I had never dealt with them firsthand before. One of the things you learn in the Bose home hi-fi division is that you don't want any wires showing. I set up the stage, patching together runs for the microphones and runs for the speakers. I got it all set up and ran the cables underneath the carpet on the stage so no one would see them. When Robert and Ramdas arrived, Ramdas decided he wanted to sit in a different spot than the one I had set up, which required adjusting the microphone and the mic stand. There was not much room to move the cable, so I yanked and yanked. If this didn't work, I'd have to get them off the stage and lift the carpet, pull out the cables, put the carpet back down, and we had maybe 100 people sitting in the audience already. Finally, on one yank, I suddenly had all this room. Well, either I had extra length I didn't think I had, or the cable had come undone. I went back to the soundboard. They started talking, and nobody could hear anything. I finally got Robert's mic working through the mixer, but I couldn't manage Ramdas's vocal. I was starting to sweat. Then out of the blue, Ramdas's mic came on. Okay, now I had full control through the mixer for both their vocals. The night went on. Everything was good as far as functionality. After everybody left, I was breaking everything down. I lifted the rug, and sure enough, the cables were undone on Ramdas's microphone. But it had worked. How had it worked without the cables connected? We had a picture of Maharaji above the stage. I looked up, and the picture was smiling at me. I started crying. There's no way that it should have worked at all. Not a chance. Yet it had. And that was it for me because it defied everything I knew.
I love that. I love that because it really does make a point. It's like, how does that even work? You know?
Right.
How does that come together?
That wasn't really about Ramdas. I'm sorry. I happened to run into that one, and I like that story.
No, that's okay. And I'm glad that you did. I mean, what a fabulous story. One of the stories I had read in your book that I thought was just really empowering was Lonnie Travis. And it, talks about Lonnie's journey going through, recovering from, addiction. Mm-hmm. And how that connection with Ramdas changed everything.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And right now I'm working on a book of stories about Ramdas. So there'd be a lot more Ramdas stories coming.
I had to pay a little homage to him too while we're here, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, without him, I've always said I owe him a debt that can never be repaid for having, brought me to Maharaji.
Wow. What a touching connection you had. You probably have a lot of stories that didn't even make it in the book that you had personally.
Oh, absolutely. Maharaji. Yeah.
Any you care to share?
Well, there's one that I mentioned in the book at one of the intros to one of the sections of the book, but I'll tell it again just because I love it, which is that I had been smoking beedies. I don't know if you know what those are. They're these little foul cigarettes that it's a betel leaf wrapped around some very low grade tobacco. And they're very cheap, and they're they're ubiquitous throughout India. And I had been smoking them as a way to sort of hang out with the guy that I married, or that Maharaji married me to, which is another whole story. And I really wanted to quit. I mean, they were really awful, but I was sort of stuck with this social idea of smoking these bidis. And I came into the ashram one day, and Maharaji looked at me and he called me over and he said, "Stop smoking bidis." And then he said, "I'm the CID of the heart." The CID is the Indian equivalent of the CIA. So in other words, he knew my heart. He knew that I wanted to quit. So he told me to quit. I gave away my pack of bidis. And after lunch, he called me back up and congratulated me on having stopped smoking. So that it was like instant reinforcement.
How, he just knew. He knew what you wanted to do and what you wanted to overcome.
Right. As he said, he's the CID of the heart.
Well, at the end of every chapter, you have these written letters. What are those?
They're not at the end. It's just that some of the stories in the book were not done through interviews. Some of them were letters that had been written long ago to, back in the snail mail days, to either Ramdas or Krishnadas. So we included a number of those in the book. So it spans the time from, 1973 when Maharaji left his body to the present day. From snail mail to Zoom.
What an incredible library you have to bring all that together and to still have stories to spare.
Oh, yes. The stories are endless. And it was a question of picking out the ones that had the most bhav. The most bhav is the feeling. It's the feeling of that connection, rather than, an intellectual understanding or a physical one. I mean, it's the emotional connection. And that was really what I was looking for in the stories that I picked, was, can I connect emotionally to what this person has experienced with Maharaji?
What did you learn overall? Like, what are some of the, I know this would be really difficult to choose, but if you had to leave our listeners with some insight from Maharaji, what would that be?
Well, his teaching came down to a very simple thing, which was love everyone, feed everyone, remember God, and tell the truth. And feed everyone was his way of saying, be of service. Because that's very much the path that he proposed for us, I guess you could say, which was simply that to try to connect to everyone through soul to soul, through the love, not through, the whatever darknesses their personality might manifest. And to be of service, to help others. It's like the Bodhisattva vow, and remember God, love everyone, serve everyone, remember God. And then probably the hardest of them all is the tapasya of tell the truth.
Why do you think tell the truth was one that he selected as something to be learned?
Because when you really start to go into what that means, I mean, it really means tell the truth of your being. Who are you really? Who are you? What is the truth? It's a very deep dive into what is truth? What is Sat? That is the Sat Guru we were talking about before. Sat is truth. How do you uncover the truth of your being? How do you, remove the darkness that prevents you from seeing who you really are? It's a many lifelong journey.
I know your book covers many different ways that people have connected to Maharaji. You even talk about dreams,
Oh,
which
yes.
I think that's just so empowering. What are some of the dreams or a dream that you'd like to share with us?
Well, first of all, I mean, people have to understand that when we're talking about dreams of Maharaji, they're not necessarily um, just dreams, just run off, of your mind. These are actual experiences. These are like the dreams that you feel are more real than your waking life. So let me take a look at what the dream stories we have here are.
You've got some good ones.
I'm sure I do. I'm just trying to think which one is not super long. Like this quote that I put at the beginning of the dream section by Kahlil Gibran: "Trust in dreams, for in them is hidden the gate to eternity."
So much wisdom in that.
Right. Oh, here's a good one. This is Don St. Clair. "I'm a latter-day Neem Karoli Baba devotee and kirtan guitarwala. Like many, I was introduced to Maharaji by Be Here Now when I was a 21-year-old yogi in 1981. I had a few magical connections to the lineage in Hanuman, but in 1984 in Boulder, Colorado, something truly miraculous happened. I was in between houses, sleeping in the upstairs storeroom of a crystal shop. Downstairs, directly below the room I was in and pointing up at me, was a store display of two giant 3-foot-tall crystals. Each of the 2 nights I was there, I had a powerful dream. In the first, I dreamt of a woman, obviously Indian, who came up to me, hands upraised like a hieroglyph. She simply said to me, 'I serve Vayu.' I had no idea what that meant or who Vayu was. The next night, I had the most profound dream in which I met my guru. The entire dream was just 1 moment long and consisted of a glimpse of an older gray-haired man, obviously a guru, whose image I did not remember at all. And in the flash of a moment, he transformed into a young Indian boy with the most beautiful, loving eyes. I also heard one spoken word, something like Dari. A week later, I went Sufi dancing in Boulder and bumped into my now dear friend, Benji Wertheimer, the big-hearted kirtan musician. I told Benji about my dreams, and he said, well, Vayu was the ancient Vedic wind god who was the father of Hanuman, and some say Neem Karoli Baba was an incarnation of Hanuman. And Neem Karoli Baba had an elder devotee by the name of Tiwari. With that, the room spun around me. I may have collapsed to the floor. In the center of the swirl of my tunnel vision, I saw Maharaji's face looking right at me with unmistakable look of, aha, acha, got ya. It was his undeniable darshan. He revealed his eternal presence, unfettered by mere life and death. It ripped crystal tears from my soul. I recently watched Krishna Das's movie, One Track Heart, in which he talks about Mr. Tiwari in America, and that Tiwari had visited that very same crystal shop the year before I was there. We are woven into Maharaji's miraculous blanket of love.
That is just so beautiful. Thank you for reading that. We'll leave this for our listeners. I mean, your last chapter, Many Roads Home, I mean, that really touched my heart. There was so many there, and I don't want to get into that too much because I'll start crying. So,
I still cry when I read some of the stories.
I can understand. Well, especially with having just profound, deep connections, with some these are some just amazing spiritual teachers. I mean, what an experience that has been.
I know. And there are some stories in here from people that people will recognize. And so that's interesting for them, like Duncan Trussell and, other people that are well known in the in the stratosphere out there, Mirabai Starr. To hear some of these people's stories is just wonderful. Trevor Hall, he's another one.
You have a ton of stories in here, and it's just such a profound read. I think people can pick up this book and just open it any place and just start there, right?
All right, that's the idea. It's not necessarily a book you're going to read from, front to back. You're going to pick it up, open it up, read a story, connect to it, and go on with your day.
Well, Parvati, it's been such an honor to spend this time with you. Where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community?
Well, as I said, we are planning on putting up that Facebook group called Whisper in the Heart so that they can come and share their stories and connect with me. I don't know. Send me a message on Facebook or Instagram or something.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
All right. Well, it was a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you, Parvati. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, Whisper in the Heart. If you'd like to connect with Parvati, you can at her website, parvatimarkus.com, for more information. I'd like to thank Jason Eastwood at Guitarfulness for sharing his inspiring music and talent with us. His music is known worldwide for cultivating atmospheres of harmony, inner peace, and clarity. Visit Jason's website at guitarfulness.com. Join his newsletter, be part of his community, and download his music. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.